Hello, everyone. This is Brett Theodos from the Urban Institute. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining today. We're excited to be able to discuss with you opportunity zones and advancing community priorities. We're going to be learning and sharing together today. So we know that webinars are not always the most conducive format to discussion and question and answer, but we're going to try hard to make this as interactive as possible along the way. But first, we are going to hear from some folks who have been doing a lot of work in this space. And by this space, I mean in specific how opportunity zones can be used for community benefit. We know that this is a program that's been around now, actually a couple of years, though in some ways it's still just getting going. But we also know that it can be used for a lot of different things. And so what we're going to be discussing today is a new tool to help guide stakeholders and other engaged parties to see it used for productive community beneficial products. So we'll be talking about a new Opportunity Zone community impact assessment tool that we developed here at the Urban Institute. And we'll be hearing from leaders in Kansas City and in Cleveland who are developing and working in innovative strategies to spur investment into opportunity zones that advance community goals. So this work is a collaboration here at the Urban Institute between Solomon Green and Brady Mikesville and Martha Fedorowicz and myself. And we have been very generously supported by the Gates Foundation to develop this tool. And then the Kresge Foundation has supported the local piloting work in Cleveland that has let us partner with Bradford. So I want to overview who our speakers will be and go through a couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll get started. So Solomon will walk us through the bulk of the presentation of what the tool is, and then we'll hear from Bradford, who's the Director of Regional Engagement at Fund for Our Economic Future, and from Tammy, who's the Opportunity Zone Program Manager at We Grow KC. So we're really excited for their reflections as well. And then we have reserved a good amount of time on the back end for question and answer. So a few housekeeping things to get us going. The webinar is being recorded, so you can share it afterwards with friends and family. And we will send around the link for those who weren't able to join during this session. You will be muted during the entire webinar, just so we avoid all the background noise and back and forth. But we will be taking questions, as I mentioned. So there's a question and answer box in the tool. If you could go ahead and put your name and organization and what your question is, I will filter those, and then I'll moderate a discussion at the back end. And if you do have any more questions going forward, you should feel free to send those to opportunityzones@urban.org. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Solomon. Solomon is been working with this at the beginning. He's a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Brett, for kicking us off and for the introduction. And on behalf of the research team here at the Urban Institute, I also want to thank all of our partners who really contributed to the development of this tool. I'll talk in a minute about how we built it and who we consulted. Many of you are joining for the webinar. For some of you, this is the first time getting a chance to see the fruit of your efforts and your contributions. For those of you who are new to the tool, we launched it earlier this month, and it is available, as Brett mentioned, already on the Urban Institute's website. I encourage you to check out the tool after the webinar. What I'll be doing over the next couple of minutes is demonstrating the tool, answering 4 key questions: why we created the tool, how we built it, what it does, and how it can be used. And for simplicity and brevity, during the webinar, I'm going to be using screenshots of the tool, but I do encourage you to test it out yourself after the webinar on a hypothetical project that you're interested in or you're working on, so you can see from start to finish how the tool works. I also wanted to note that if you want to get a shortcut, we also made available a sample project that I'll be referring to during the presentation of Clearview Homes. It doesn't actually exist, but it scored very high. And you can download the PDF of the full scorecard based on our answers to this hypothetical project, just to preview what your results may look like. So just to start, why did we create the tool? Well, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on opportunity zones and what they are, but if you've been paying any attention to the tax incentive, you do know that they are highly controversial, and it does seem like people have strong feelings as to whether they will be a bonanza or a disaster for communities. And I think the answer, of course, lies somewhere in between. But what's going to be key to their success is how well those investments are aligned with local needs and priorities. But what we realized early on is that gauging that alignment can be very difficult. And the reason for that is multifold. We have a lack of guidance and guardrails in the Opportunity Zone incentive. So there's no requirement from Treasury or from the federal government that Opportunity Zone investments align with community needs. There's a broad range of eligible uses. There's, of course, a diversity of market conditions across Opportunity Zone tracts. And there's a lack of transparency in which projects are receiving the incentive and where. We also knew there was a high demand for a tool like this. Mission-driven investors, intermediaries, and project sponsors want to understand the impact of their projects to achieve that double bottom line. And then community leaders in the public sector need to understand that impact in order to ensure that Opportunity Zones benefit and do not harm local communities. So we created a tool that we hope begins to address some of these gaps. It can be used to evaluate the potential social impact of projects across a broad range of types, local markets, and local priorities. We wanted it to be comparable, making apples-to-apples comparisons across project types using a single overall project score. We also wanted it to be flexible. Recognizing the wide diversity of permitted uses, we wanted it to be useful for both real estate development projects of all types and operating businesses. We wanted it to be relatively easy to complete, so we tailored the questions by project type and adapted questions to previous responses. And lastly, and most importantly, we wanted it to be responsive, to align community priorities by asking users to identify and rank established community goals and weigh scores accordingly. And we'll show you how that's done in the tool. So how did we build it? This is the collaborative part. I'm going to go back a slide. This is the collaborative part. We've, over the past several months, we've gone through a highly iterative process, starting with developing initial criteria and questions from interviews with community leaders in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, and working in partnership with OpportunityCLE and the Fund for Economic Future. And we'll hear from Bradford about those efforts in a minute. We then refined our questions and the structure of the tool based on a review of other social impact and racial equity assessment tools. We actually include a full list of what those tools we looked at in our user guide. So if you want to see how our tool compares to others in the field, that's a great resource. We then improved the tool based on feedback in a day-long workshop with more than a dozen national leaders with diverse experience and perspectives. Once we had a complete tool based on all of those inputs, we continued to pilot it in Cleveland and test it across other markets in Alabama, Atlanta, Baltimore, and the state of Washington on real projects. And this was especially important as we developed our scoring system. We wanted the scores to reflect realities on the ground and across a diversity of projects. So what is in the tool and what does it do? There are three key features of the tool, and I'll quickly run through all three of them in the presentation. The first is the survey. This is where users fill in and respond to a set of questions about the features and characteristics of a particular project. At the completion of the survey, users receive the scorecard, and you see a screenshot of the Clearview Homes project, first page of the scorecard here. We'll come back to it in a moment. The third key feature is our user guide, and I'll talk briefly about all three of these features. So first, the survey. Within the survey, there are three main sections. The first asks some basic information about the project, the name, location, the project sponsor, the estimated size and financing sought if it's applicable. The second is the survey based on these 7 impact areas shown on the screen, and these are derived from our work in Cleveland and our review of other social impact and racial equity tools. And then lastly, because the tool is in beta version, we also include a section for feedback. So we ask every user to tell us about their experience with the tool and how it can be improved. So the meat of the tool are these survey questions and these 7 impact areas. But the first one is where the real innovation is, and we think to the theme of this topic for the webinar, why the tool is well-equipped, well-adapted to be able to help align projects with community goals and priorities. The first section of the tool asks the user to describe how the project sponsor has engaged the community, anything from consulting community-led plans to surveys and community meetings. And the project receives a score based on the responses to those community goals and priorities and the strength of the engagement. But more importantly, we ask users, based on those engagement strategies, to rank community priorities. The rankings given to those priorities determine the weight of the impact area in the final score. And this is the section where collaboration between project sponsors and community leaders will be most important. And in a minute, we'll hear from Bradford and Tammy about how this section and the tool can be used as a starting point for more structured community engagement. So I won't go through all 6 of the topical impact areas, but I'm just going to preview one of them, which is the affordable and accessible housing. In each section, we ask users to describe features of the project as they relate to that impact area. And most of the questions require either multiple choice or yes or no responses. We do include some questions that ask for clarification in a short narrative response, but these are limited to questions that can help reviewers better understand a multiple choice response. They do not count towards the score. Where we use terms that may need clarification or responding to questions may require consultation with outside resources, we provide links with definitions and guidance on where to go for more information. While we aren't able to fully account for local market conditions, in some cases we do ask users to characterize conditions in the community, such as in the first question in the housing section, which asks about the local housing market. Responses to these questions will determine options and thresholds for subsequent questions. So here, identifying a community as a rapidly appreciating market will result in questions about deeper affordability and preservation. We also ask questions about potential harm from a particular project, such as pricing a unit more than 150% above the average rent or median sales price in the Opportunity Zone tract, which could lead to or accelerate gentrification pressures. For these questions, responses can lower the score in the impact area and the overall project score. And importantly, they'll be flagged in the scorecard as requiring additional attention and community consultation. So here's a screenshot of the scorecard for the first page of the scorecard for the Clearview Homes project I mentioned. This scorecard is generated upon completion of the survey. And I won't describe the scoring system in detail. We do describe it in our user guide. But the basics are that each impact area is scored based on responses in that particular section. And then the section is weighted by the user-defined community priorities to derive an overall project score. In the scorecard, we provide some guidance on how to interpret scores, emphasizing that scores are based on answers provided and that the final score should just serve as just one input in evaluating the potential social impacts of projects. We use a radar chart shown here on the right to show the relative strengths and weaknesses of the project by impact area. And then following the scorecard summary, we also include a full list of responses, again, flagging if there are any responses which merit additional attention and community consultation. We also provide a user guide. And in the user guide, we offer details on how the tool was developed, how it's organized, and how to use it. We also include principles for delivering social impact derived from the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty and our discussions with community stakeholders in Cleveland and elsewhere. We provide an explanation of how responses are scored and guidance on how to interpret scores. And finally, we provide some additional tools and resources, both on opportunity zones and by specific impact area. So how can the tool be used? Well, in a minute, we're going to hear from some actual uses of the tool, but at the outset, we've designed the tool with 4 sets of users in mind. For project sponsors, they can use the tool to determine how well projects align with community priorities, make improvements, and solicit support for projects. For the public sector, they can use the tool to identify projects that merit additional incentives, as well as projects that risk harming communities that may require greater scrutiny. For community-based organizations, they can use the tool to help articulate community priorities and evaluate projects based on those priorities, to negotiate with project sponsors and seek funding for community-driven projects. And lastly, for mission-driven investors in philanthropy, they can use the tool to target support and investments in projects that strengthen communities and deliver benefits to residents. But importantly, we're learning as we go how different stakeholders can use the tool. So we're interested in hearing from you during the question and answer period about your ideas about how you might use the tool. So finally, just some next steps for us. The tool is in beta version. Sorry, I'm going to stick there for a minute. The tool is in beta version, so we look forward to hearing your feedback on the tool. And we do plan to release a revised tool at the end of the year, which is improved based on the feedback we receive. We are on the lookout for new partnerships and platforms. We're very much interested in strategic partnerships that can help embed the tool in platforms and institutions that match projects to investors and vice versa. We're also interested in doing demonstrations to networks of specific stakeholder groups on how they might use the tool. We're interested in going deep in specific places. We'd like to work more closely with community leaders, project sponsors, public sector, and a handful of cities to think creatively about how to use the tool. And we want to provide more targeted support to help embed the tool in local decision making. And lastly, we hope to use the tool in some of the responses we receive to report out on some aggregate trends as to what we're learning as our database of responses grows. I want to be very clear, and we're clear on our website, that we will not be publishing any responses. Users, when they use the tool, are free to take their scorecard and share it with any audience they see appropriate. However, we will be collecting responses so that we could do some internal research, both to improve the tool and if we can find some interesting findings based on responses to share them more generally. So if you want to test out the tool yourself, you can go to the landing page for the tool, which is on the screen. It's quite simple, www.urban.org/OZTool. There you'll find a link to the survey, a link to the user guide, the sample scorecard I mentioned for Clearview Homes, and a link to other research we're doing on opportunity zones. If you have questions or would like to explore a partnership, you should feel free to email us at opportunityzones@urban.org. And in the meantime, if you have questions for us today, please do submit them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them after we've heard from Bradford and Tammy.
Great. Thank you so much, Solomon, for giving us that overview. I think that helps set the stage and gives us a sense of all the different moving parts that the tool addresses. I want to emphasize, just as Solomon said, it really is in looking at the tool that all of this will start to make more sense. So after the webinar, we hope that you do take the time to jump into the tool yourselves and begin to play with it and get familiar with it. But let us turn now to Bradford and then to Tammy to hear about the local work that you all are doing and intersection points. So Bradford, let's go to you next.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. First, just like to say thanks to the Urban Institute both for having me join today, to share the work, and also for just being a great partner on the ground here in Cleveland. My name is Bradford Davey. I'm the Director of Regional Engagement at the Fund for Economic Future. We are 36 funding institutions that work together to advance growth and opportunity in the Northeast Ohio economy. We are also a founding member of OpportunityCLE, the civic collaboration working to advance opportunity zones in Greater Cleveland. Next slide. In Cuyahoga County, there are 64 census tracts that are designated opportunity zones. 48 of those are in the city of Cleveland themselves. They can be broken into 11 distinct districts or neighborhoods. They're mostly urban. You can see a few districts, the southwest, the south, and the far east outer ring suburbs that also qualify. Next slide. And who is OpportunityCLE? The impetus for this was to pull together, operationalize, and coordinate efforts in the disparate 64 census tracts across Cuyahoga County. And so 6 economic development organizations and 2 philanthropic partners came together to form OpportunityCLE with the belief that coordinated effort could attract and advance socially responsible OZ investments. So those entities are the City of Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, Greater Cleveland Partnership, who is our regional chamber, CDA, a CDFI that operates within the Greater Cleveland Partnership, and then the Fund for Economic Future. 2 of our philanthropic partners that have been allies in this work are the Cleveland Foundation and the George Gunn Foundation. Next slide. OpportunityCLE really came together around 6 basic functions, 2 of which I'll focus on today. First was marketing. How do we build a standalone brand and prospectus to attract national investment into our qualified zones? How do we capitalize a qualified opportunity fund here that allows us to leverage capital to invest in socially responsible investments? The third is pipeline and platform. How do we deal aggregate? How do we show and market these deals individually across the country? And then how do we couple that with a social impact framework that allows us to illustrate the deals that we want to lift up here in Cleveland? How do we provide technical assistance? And then what policy levers can we really lean on? And so that is really the core focus of the OpportunityCLE work streams. And I will touch mostly on how we've combined both pipeline and platform with a social impact scorecard that allows us to lift up the deals that we want to get noticed across the country. Next slide. Great. And so I want to be really practical in our conversation here today and ground us in the work that's happening on the ground. A year ago, OpportunityCLE partnered with the Opportunity Exchange, which is a deal aggregation platform that allows residents, project sponsors, businesses to upload their projects in a front-facing portal where investors from around the country can log in and get information on their deals. And so we've operationalized this by allowing anyone from the community to submit through a project form basic information. And so as it comes in, we ask questions related to what type of projects and how much equity capital you're looking for, as well as a brief description. This works as the creation of a basic investment prospectus. As the work is intensified in Cleveland, we've also coupled this with a localized version of the Urban Institute's project assessment tool that Solomon and Brett reviewed earlier. And so project sponsors who are submitting their projects also have the option to fill out questions that are very similar to the questions in the assessment tool, all of which are relating to the 6 overarching social impact parameters in the tool. And so how is your project aligning with community goals? In what ways is it producing accessible and quality jobs? Are they supporting community wealth building? What does the creation and preservation of affordable housing look like? Are there environmental impacts, and what does connectivity look like for your Opportunity Zone project? Now, when the project sponsor submits both of these, a review committee reviews whether or not the project meets our parameters for curation on the platform, particularly, is it an OZ investment? Do we think it'll break ground in a reasonable amount of time? And are there any outstanding liabilities against the project sponsor? And then at the same time as this is being reviewed for submission, we review the social impact score and summary. And so after we take a look at the raw score that's produced from the assessment tool, a group of practitioners from the 7 institutions that I named that are members move this project along through its social impact assessment. And if it both reaches a particular threshold for a score and practitioners believe that it's reasonable to achieve, we actually provide it a social impact designation. And so what I mean by that is we provide a badge. You can see in the center second column a project that's stamped with a social impact badge. And so what we believed really early on in this process was that as we compete with national investment opportunities, and the coast and New York continue to attract the highest yield investments, we needed a way to create a system where our projects were vetted for their social impact so that we could get a lion's share of mission-aligned capital. And so now, as we're moving through this process and badging deals as socially impactful, we're now syndicating these mission-aligned projects to mission-aligned investors, and we're seeing some real return because these projects have been quantifiably determined to be of benefit to the community. So next slide. We're still really early on in this process, but we've already demonstrated that a commitment to social impact allows for some early wins. And so a few of them I've listed here. So CDA, the CDFI within OpportunityCLE raised and capitalized a $9 million fund with support from JP Morgan Chase's Pro Neighborhood program to do particular investment in the Clark Fulton, Glenville, and Buckeye Kinsman neighborhood. This is proof that mission investors were attracted to our commitment to strong social impact measures. The Arcturus Impact Fund, we developed a $10 million fund in partnership with the Arcturus Impact Investors. Cuyahoga County and the George Gunn Foundation were the first in locally to leverage national money. And there's a commitment from the principals to follow the social impact parameters contained in the assessment tool. So we're looking at ways to operationalize those investments the same way that we're operationalizing this sort of syndication of social impact projects on our platform. The OZ Catalyst Prize, OpportunityCLE was named a Forbes OZ Catalyst for leading community-focused OZ work and creation of a positive model for other communities to follow. And then finally, my organization, the Fund for Economic Future, something we're really proud of, provided some technical assistance grants to local organizations who committed to utilizing the social impact tool. So the Central Kitchen is a small business incubator and accelerator that focuses on food production, who had an OZ expansion project in the Central neighborhood. We asked before providing a grant to fill out the social impact assessment tool. We had a really terrific conversation with the executive there, who was thinking through how to be an even better civic actor, even though his project scored high. After working with this project sponsor on moving and advancing his project to more social impact, we provided a technical assistance grant to make their expansion within the Opportunity Zone possible. And so these are just some of the ways that we've tied both the assessment tool and the public platforms together to produce a holistic approach to both grant making, technical assistance, and attraction of Opportunity Zone funds. That's it for me.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Bradford. It's been really exciting to watch as you guys have developed your strategy locally and how OZs have been the starting point, but not the ending point to all of the work that you are building, really a broader momentum and agenda there. So thank you for sharing exciting tools that you have going. Tammy, let's go over to you. I'm interested to learn and hear about what you are doing locally in Kansas City.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to share with what we're doing in Kansas City. So good afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is Tammy Buckner. I am the Opportunity Zone Program Manager for We Grow KC, which is a coalition brought together by the Kauffman Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce, Urban Neighborhood Initiatives. And our goal has been to engage a strong dialogue and formulate strategies that solely focus on improving the livelihood of opportunity zones and the residents in those areas. Myself, and as well as a colleague of mine, Troy Carlson with Initiative Inc., has been brought in to manage and work directly with community residents, leaders, as well as investors and foundation and philanthropic entities. Next slide. So our progress has been really intentional. We have been working with a slew of private foundations as well as CDFIs, community development organizations, and quite a few nonprofit organizations that are in Kansas City. And the goal again has been to be very intentional, working with community, the residents, and making sure that we actually hear from the residents and what they are truly wanting. We all know that Opportunity Zones has been ins and outs, there's different things that's been going on, but we wanted to make sure that our residents in Kansas City are truly heard. And this is how we have, really been working toward that goal. Next slide. So our vision, our mission is to make sure that we are stimulating economic activities, looking for projects that will help with increased economic mobility for the residents in these areas. And basically the mission is to work connectively and very intensely with the residents, making sure that the East Side neighborhoods are involving them in this process. So this is where this tool has become most helpful so that we can find those projects, because there are many projects that we find, and sometimes there are those that may not look like and be effective for the residents. So that's where we've been utilizing the tool to make sure that we find those areas. Next slide. So we have 5 different opportunity zones in Kansas City that we've been focusing on. 3 have been most importantly focused on, just because that's in the urban core area and where we really like to see and want to see those changes. Looking at mission-driven investors that are looking for transformation and not transactional deals. And so those are the areas that we've been looking at. So if you look to the blue, the yellow is like a Martin City, which is further out south, but some of the ones that we've been focusing on is the Swope Park, Paseo Gateway, and the Central City areas. And those areas that we've termed like a street corner deals that we're looking for. So if you can although the zones are pretty spread out, the areas that you see pretty much close together are in the green, the orange, and the purple. Those are the most affected areas in the urban core. Next slide. And with looking at the street corner initiative that we've been really focusing on, we wanted to make sure that we intentionally talk to residents, talk to businesses that are currently in those areas to see how we can actually transform or how we can assist them with, whether it's matchmaking through investments, helping bring together more than one type of core deal, not just real estate, but also combining these investments and these deals with things such as, whether it be like a bakery or just, some type of tech, or what are they looking for? What are we missing? What actually needs to be in those residents to bring a viable neighborhood together? Next slide. So we've looked at 3 different verticals that would assist us with this. One, again, is our most important, which is our active neighborhood outreach. And we've been utilizing the method with the tool of going out, measuring the amount of time spent in, different opportunities, making sure that neighborhoods are trusting and believing that we are intentional about what we're doing in the opportunity zones, and then making sure that everything is inclusive and driven by economic development. The second vertical is placemaking through matchmaking. So what that is we are looking at the different incentives, and whether it's just on investments, but it's also could be additional capital stacks that we're able to provide so that investors and philanthropy can get their best opportunity from the deals. And then the third pillar would be partnering with those wealth building or partnering with philanthropic capital to leverage something like an ESOP or something like a trust fund for the neighborhoods that are in those areas. Next slide. So again, we've used this tool. We're using this tool by way of going out, gathering this information, not only using this, but also talking with some of our local governments and city initiatives to make sure that we are getting that information. The tool has been great. We have a equities and values subcommittee that normally take a look at the projects that we have been bringing in, but utilizing this tool has allowed us to put that information in and pull those algorithms out. Once we receive a scorecard and receive that score, that allows us to take that to various philanthropy or foundations to show that this is definitely a deal that's mission driven, that is social impacted for the community, and something that will bring in jobs, something that may look like we're having affordable housing, and not that it would be a market rate housing that would drive out neighbors in those areas. Next slide. So as we're moving forward, one initiative that we're also working on is to create more so of a one-stop shop, and that's more like an equity transfer. So over time, we'll have, philanthropic equity is brought into different neighborhoods, helping with the investment stacks on the deals that we're finding. And again, the tool has been very helpful in doing that. We have been partnering with various CDFIs in the area that has been providing different funds, and also the foundation and philanthropy that has been working together so that we can utilize that for the neighborhood projects. Next slide. So again, the We Grow KC Coalition, we've been recognized also as one of the Forbes top OZ catalysts for leading community focused OZ work. We have been working very closely, again, with so many of the organizations. We have a couple different funds that's come out of the coalition, which is the Affordable Living KC Opportunity Fund. That's allowing investors to invest in some of the volume production with the net zero ready for construction. We also have AltCap that has created Equity Squared as a qualified opportunity fund to provide patient capital for new and growing businesses, which is focused mainly for women and minority business owners. So that's been going very well. Again, our initiative right now is to create that one-stop shop, which is more so of a neighborhood equity, a for-profit entity that would allow community engagement at its core. So if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We have our website at wegrowkc.org, where we do allow people to be able to provide their projects from the website, and then we're utilizing this tool to assist us with moving the projects through the pipeline.
Tammy, terrific. Thank you so much. It is also really exciting to see the momentum that you guys have locally and you're developing, and also very interested to see how this continues to grow. Great. So this is a reminder that we are interested in questions and answers. So we were true to our word and saved 20 minutes to be able to really dig into the questions. We've got some of them coming in that we're going to start in on. Thank you for those of you who sent them. And for those of you who still have something you want us to chat about, please go ahead and use the box in Zoom there to go ahead and submit the questions. So first off, Solomon, just one important clarifying question here. Is the social impact assessment tool that Bradford was discussing the same as the OZ assessment tool, or are they different?
Yes, great question. The answer is mostly yes, they are the same with a little bit of difference. So as I previewed in our presentation, we've gone through a period of piloting and testing the tool, and the original work of the tool, the original development of the questions and framework were in Cleveland. And part of that was to be able to deliver to Cleveland, because of how quickly deals were being developed and cultivated, what we are calling the alpha version of the tool, which they've already embedded into the OpportunityCLE site. It is very similar. The main differences are we actually have, since we publicly released the beta version of the tool, we are calling it the Community Impact Assessment Tool. We're really trying to emphasize the alignment between the project and the community goals. So that's one change. We also have modified some of the questions based on our piloting and testing, and we've shared the new questions with the folks at OpportunityCLE. So when they have a chance, this is all moving very fast, we'll be updating some of those questions. But essentially, the two tools are the same. Don't let the nomenclature confuse you. Anyone can use the tool that we've published online, and we're also open to partnering with other platforms who want to embed the tool on their websites as well.
Great. A question now from Courtney Tracy. Since some of the questions sound like they need to be researched, for example, home prices, can you save an unfinished version of the tool, or do you have to go through the survey all the way complete in one fell swoop?
Another great question. So we did try and make it easy to research responses through the links. So I encourage you to check out the tool. We didn't click on any of the links, obviously, in the screenshot, but sprinkled throughout the questions. If there is, for example, if we talk about living wages, you can click on the link. It will open in a new window to take you to the MIT living wage calculator. So when you do have to do research, wherever possible, we try and make it easy for you to do it while you are completing the answers. That said, we recognize, depending on who is filling out the tool, they may not have all the answers right in front of them. So it is possible, as you are completing the tool, if you click out of it, your answers will be saved. Every user and project gets a unique code for that project. So you could actually take that code, the first step in completing the tool, to enter your email address, so that unique code will be sent to you. You could share that unique code with colleagues if you want to work collaboratively on completing the tool. Anyone can use that code to enter responses, and responses will be saved. The important thing is that once you hit submit and generate the scorecard, the code will only take you to the scorecard. You can't go back and change your questions. You can, however, start at that point on a new scorecard if the project evolves. You do want to change your answers. Unfortunately, with this version of the tool, not because we didn't know it wasn't useful, but because of the platform we built it on, there's no way after you hit submit and receive your scorecard to go back and change your answers. But you could do multiple scorecards for the same project, compare your answers over time, and certainly while you are completing the survey, your answers will be saved.
Great. Next question is from Joanna Trotter. Hi, Joanna. The question is, who is the audience for this tool? Are these community-based organizations that are ranking projects to try to promote and elicit OZ investment, or is it OZ investors who are trying to identify which projects are most community aligned?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think those are all audiences we're trying to reach, and the tool is flexible enough to be able to reach them. I think the best way to answer it is actually to look at how the tool is being used in Cleveland and Kansas City. And Tammy and Bradford, you should feel free to jump in here as well. But two very different models, both of them powerful. Using it as a screening tool for an intermediary like OpportunityCLE to help match project sponsors to investors and vice versa is one important use of the tool. The other is to spark community conversations about what their priorities are and how to align projects with their priorities. So we could imagine using the tool to lead a design charrette for a project, or to have a project sponsor go to a community meeting, run through the tool, and have it be the basis for a voluntary community benefit agreement. So the tool is very much designed to spark those kinds of community conversations. We have noticed that the priority setting, there's always trade-offs in developing a tool like this. We did want the tool to reflect community priorities, but anticipating that most of the questions in the remainder of the tool, the answers are probably held by the project sponsor, the details of the project, how many jobs are going to be created, what the exit strategy is, what rent levels are. We do ask the user, who could be the project sponsor, could be any number of stakeholders, to do the ranking of community priorities. What we anticipate is that the project sponsor, if they are completing the rankings, that they are basing those on existing community engagement and plans. It could also start from a community group who leads with those rankings and then polls the project sponsor to get the answers for the more detailed questions about the project.
So Tammy and Bradford, I'd love to bring you into this in your experience working in Kansas City and in Cleveland. What do you find that people need to know? What's helpful as a conversation starter? Who's the audience that's most engaged, that's least engaged, most resistant to thinking through in a structured way who would benefit from investment?
Tammy, would you like to go first?
Sure, I can take that. Yeah, I truly believe it would be more so of the project lead or a project, someone that would actually go into the communities with this tool, because it's so easy to walk straight through. I've been dealing with people that have projects, and we just really need to know what's the outcome of the project. I mean, if you're building certain deals, will it actually bring jobs into the community? And utilizing this tool, again, makes it so simple. I mean, unless, yeah, sure, there are some questions that need to be researched, but if you have a project that has, much of that information there, you can really get a solid answer after the survey. And I think it's been great, just being in the community, having my laptop, sitting down, going through all of the questions, or at least most of the questions, and getting some type of tool, or some type of scorecard, and then being able to provide that unique number to someone else to assist with filling out that information. So I think the tool has been great for the community-wise.
I'll just add, I really appreciate the way that Tammy is utilizing this so directly as it relates to deal flow. I think, in my mind, one of the other interesting ways to think about this, really two parts, right? It's one part systems change work. Our economic development professionals and civic sector actors coming together and talking about projects, coming in with a shared understanding or shared metrics on what is good community-based investment. And so anytime we have a tool that we've all stacked hands on that allows us to come into a room to discuss a project with sort of shared metrics, I think that that's good long-term systems work. The second part, I'm sure that many of us on this call would agree that with the proliferation of racial equity and inclusion language, with a growth in conversations around social impact investing, right? There are different levels and appreciations and understandings of what that means. And so I think it's really important for us to create a shared narrative. And our friends at Policy Link and I had a conversation once about creating a Rosetta Stone for investors and public sector actors to talk about social impact investing from a shared book, shared translation. Mm-hmm. And I think the assessment tool offers a place to start that work, to really quantify what we mean by that and all get on the same page.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's exactly where I was going to go with my next question. So let us dig into that a little more. This was lifted up from Roberto at Elevated Chicago. Thank you, Roberto, who wanted to know, how does the tool assess and score things related to diversity, equity, inclusion, especially racial, and how does that contribute to understanding the project's community benefit? Maybe Solomon, you want to start, and then folks on the phone can jump in if they have more to add.
Sure. And I do encourage Tammy and Bradford to jump in as well. But one of the sections that we did not show a screenshot of is community wealth building, where we do ask about who owns the project, community ownership of the project, the demographics of not just owners but or developers, but also who they'll be contracting with. So there are some explicit questions in the tool itself that get at racial equity. More importantly, we think of the tool as being embedded within the context of opportunity zones. And a lot of our research, and particularly Brady's and Brett's here, has shown how opportunity zones are disproportionately lower income, they're disproportionately communities of color, and they are disproportionately communities that have lacked capital investment in the past. So opportunity zones exist against a backdrop of place-based racial inequity, and we think the tool can help make sure that investment in those places is delivering a positive impact and benefit to the communities. And importantly, because we designed the tool to lead with community priorities, which is often hard to identify, but we wanted to build it into the DNA of the tool itself. We hope that using the tool will also advance community ownership, power, and voice in terms of setting the stage, setting the direction of investments as well. So I think we try to, without being too prescriptive about what the right and wrong answers were, address those equity concerns in the design of the tool.
Tammy, Bradford, anything you want to add there?
No, I think that was right on point.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. So we got a question from Tony Ramirez on how many social impact investment projects have received funding to date. And I have a feeling, Tony, you mean not just through our tool, but through opportunity zones generally. If you mean through our tool, we just launched last week. So people are figuring it out, but I'm not confident any projects have moved through the tool to closed funding in a week. But we do expect projects will be moving through that pipeline over the next couple of quarters. With reflection for opportunity zones more generally, this is something that we're attending to. It's difficult to keep track of. We've submitted a public comment letter to encourage Treasury and IRS to do the tracking needed to understand community benefits and really activities and inventory transactions with respect to opportunity zones. We don't have movement yet there that's sufficient. There's also been legislative discussions and even draft legislation, but nothing that's passed through yet. So we are actually working on a research product right now under a different project that is doing a qualitative inventory of a lot of projects, and so we'd be happy to send that out to folks who are interested when that's ready in the next couple of months. But the short answer is we don't know, and that's one of the challenges with the program as it's currently listed. So I wanted to ask another question now around operating businesses. And you started to touch on this a little bit, Solomon. We know that most of what is happening so far with opportunity zones is real estate, but how is the tool able to accommodate these different asset classes, these different uses with a particular eye to operating businesses, which might produce a very different benefit from a housing development?
Yeah, so the tool can be used, as I said at the outset, for operating businesses and real estate development projects. The first question, one of the first questions you answer when you go through the project information is to classify the project based on the type of development or whether it's an operating business. And the questions that are asked flow from that response. I will say it was more challenging for us to find other assessment tools that were designed for operating businesses. In our user guide, you can see all the ones we compared. I think out of the 12 or 13 we looked at, we could only find a handful, one or two, that were more designed for operating businesses. But we wanted to make sure, knowing that was an eligible use, we wanted to make sure to cover them in the tool. So there are questions that are designed for operating businesses. What I will say is in a couple of the sections, there aren't many questions, like in affordable housing, for example. Ownership is easier to ask about community ownership and wealth building, jobs, but some of the topics simply don't lend themselves to operating questions for operating businesses. And where there aren't enough questions in that section for that type of project, we do have, and we described this in our user guide, we default to a do no harm score, because we don't want to penalize, but we also don't want to, if affordable housing is the priority and you're developing an operating business that is sort of neutral, for example, on that issue, we want those projects, and they may not be bad projects, they just aren't aligned with the priorities. So we adjust the scoring to reflect that, and in the future version of the tool, it's probably one of the areas we're on the lookout for suggestions for how it could be more useful for operating businesses in particular.
Great. So our next question is from Brendan Marr. Hey, Brendan, thanks for the question. And it is for you, Tammy, and for you, Bradford. And the question is, how did you ensure equitable participation and access to the tool, to the survey? What are the mechanisms or pathways that you're engaging in that?
Bradford, you want to go first? Or?
Sure. Yeah. So in the onset, the Urban Institute was really great in getting on the ground and having community conversations. So, the 20 or 30 so odd interviews were done across the region to ask questions about what positive projects would mean in the OZs that have been identified. So that was informative on the front end about what type of questions and what type of priorities we would have. As you start to work inside the tool, you'll note that there's a requirement to add community weights, which of the 6 pillars is the most important to community. And so to help us ensure that we were reflecting the alignment of the community and the organizations working on the ground, we did a survey of all of the CDC's strategic directions and tried to map the strategic directions against the individual 6 scorecard items. And so we've tried to inform our weighting from the start. I'll note that OpportunityCLE and the portal, the Opportunity Exchange, allows for the submission of projects by anyone. And so anyone with a project or an idea can put a project through the platform at no cost to them. And then I'll just say that some of the work of my organization at the fund is particularly around providing early stage technical assistance grants to projects that may just not quite be at investability. They might need some pro forma work. They come from a disadvantaged community where access to capital is a little bit more difficult. And so we're working with the individual projects that meet that social impact designation to get their projects where they need to be for investment.
Thank you, Bradford. And Tammy, this is the last word for you because we're close to time, but please, we'd love to hear your reflection.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much on the same track because we do have a subcommittee, which is our Equity and Values subcommittee that has been assisting with weighing the projects. This tool came in handy as we started to go down that path. So utilizing the areas that can actually weigh in on what the communities want has been very helpful. So I think that's how we'll be using it in that way of making sure that we know that everything is being looked at and being intentional about, you know, everything from the racial, the economics, bringing in wealth development, wealth building, as well as, you know, any type of workforce development and job creation. So I think this tool has been in that sense, helping our subcommittee making those decisions.
Terrific. Just very quick reflection. We got a couple of comments or questions on could we use data, local data, and that's actually something we've talked a lot about and we're thinking about as a 2.0 version of this, is we actually have something that allows users to interact and pull in data from sources. Couldn't be worked in for the beta version, but that's something we've looked at. And that will allow data to be updated about communities. I will say there are a lot of other OZ tools out there. We've helped on the MasterCard one, Citi has one in addition, and there are several others, probably a half dozen, that are looking in various ways at understanding zones and looking at trends over time. That's obviously not what we're doing here, but those are another resource as well. And we did get a question about whether we can share kind of a full version of the scorecard in static form. So we're going to give that some more thought, how to engage with that. It's a little tricky because there's skip patterns and such that are built into the survey logic, but we'll follow up on that. And then a question about whether there's an API for the tool. And we are actually actively discussing how to integrate it into different platforms. So there's not, I mean, it is an API that's producing the scorecard itself on the back end, but we'd be happy to have follow-up conversations if folks are interested in that. So with that, thank you all for joining. Thank you especially to Bradford and to Tammy. Really excited about the work that you're doing locally to promote better outcomes for residents in OZs, and thank you for your reflections on the tool and just being partners in it along the way. Thanks to all of you for joining today. The webinar, as I mentioned, will be recorded and slides will be posted online tomorrow. And if we didn't get to all your questions, there's a couple we didn't get to, or if you have others, feel free to email us at opportunityzones@urban.org, and you can access more about the tool and on our landing page about Opportunity Zone information. So with that, thanks and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.